So I will appeal to external argument and evidence to show that person that this belief is true. So you can know that God exists in a properly basic way by experiencing God immediately, and you can show God exists through the arguments and evidence that we've talked about tonight. So I see these arguments and evidence as being confirmatory of the properly basic belief in God that is grounded in the experience of God.
Don't you love philosophy? Properly basic beliefs are in fact a legitimate argument and topic of philosophical discussion. And I would certainly agree that believing in the reality and physicality of the world is a basic proper belief. I am a very strong believer in the reality of the world. I really don't think that you guys are all a figment of my imagination. I would have a very twisted imagination to find myself here tonight debating this kind of stuff with an imaginary audience. The point is, however, that one of the reasons this is a so-called properly basic belief is because unless you're crazy in a serious way, everybody on the planet shares this kind of belief. And if you don't share that kind of belief, again, you can jump into Bertrand Russell's car and drive into the famous wall that I was mentioning before. The point with God, on the other hand, is there's plenty of people, and we're talking about in the tens of millions at this point, or hundreds of millions, that don't share that proper basic belief. So what makes Craig think that this is a proper basic belief is beyond my imagination.
Okay. Let me just mention one thing here at this point. If you have asked a question already, I will ask you not to ask another one in the interest of time. So, a question...
And he's keeping track. He's got little pictures over there of everybody who's asked a question.
Mr. Pigliucci, you posited that you didn't have the foggiest idea of what truth is. You also posited that Mr. Craig didn't have the foggiest idea of truth either. I'll let him defend his own knowledge, but I assume that you were attempting to posit a truth. How did you come to this truth if you don't have the foggiest idea of what it is?
I don't think I said the foggiest idea. I have a foggy idea of what truth is. My point was that neither Craig nor I nor anybody else here knows for sure what the truth is out there about a lot of things. I mean, we probably all know, as I said, that there is a physical reality here. This is a truth that we all share. I think that's true. I cannot prove it to you. I mean, it's as much as the idea of a mad scientist playing with my brain in a vacuum is unbelievable. It is possible. It is not logically possible to dispute it. So, I'm sorry? He didn't. I know. He thinks he knows. I think he's wrong. The point is,
stick with the question, please.
Yes. The point seems to me that that it's much more reasonable, both in terms of empirical evidence and in terms of logical reasoning, for a lot of truths, and especially for the kind of truth that we're talking about here tonight, the existence or non-existence of a supernatural being. It seems much more reasonable to me to assume a position, a tentative position. My position is, I don't think so, but I'm willing to consider the opposite evidence.
Yeah. Dr. Pigliucci's view sounded like it was self-contradictory. I think that's what the questioner was getting at. But I think what he's really saying is that he does believe there is objective truth out there. But he's just saying that we're not certain, that certainty is hard to get at. And I'd agree with that. Sure, that's right. There are some things that we feel very certain of, other things that we only think are probably true. And I think it's important that you don't go away with the impression that I'm suggesting that my arguments are based on premises which are certainly true. In order for an argument to be a good argument, the premises just have to be more probably true than their negations. And in the case of the arguments I've given tonight, I think that they meet that standard. No, I'm not certain that they're true, but I think they're more probably true than their negations, and therefore I think these are good arguments for God.
Okay. Next question, please.
Dr. Craig, in response to the microseizure argument, which seems to be a good falsifying evidence, here's another way to explain visions of God. You said that once we accept that stimulating the brain can give us experience, we're skeptics instantly, and, we've lost the real world. So, is neuroscience a waste of time?
No, I think you misunderstood, but it's certainly not a waste of time. What I'm just suggesting is that on the Christian view, we are composites of soul and body. I'm not a Cartesian type of dualist. I think there is a kind of dualism, interactionism between the soul and the body. So I'm not at all surprised by the fact that there would be portions of the brain that would be involved in a religious experience, just as there are portions of the brain that are involved in auditory experiences or visual experiences or olfactory experiences. When you think about it, since we are soul-body composites, of course the brain would be involved in these sorts of experiences. What I'm just suggesting is that showing that the brain has portions of it that are involved in these experiences does absolutely nothing to show that the experiences are not veridical. If you say just because something is involved in the brain, therefore that experience is non-veridical or illusory, then you do launch into this skeptical argument that ultimately will destroy all knowledge. So, no, neuroscience helps us to understand the functioning of the human organism, which we are, and it can certainly be helpful in helping to remedy mental disease and other pathologies, and in that sense it's wonderful. I mean, this is fantastic. But we mustn't overestimate what it proves. People who think that by showing some physical correlate in the brain that therefore that experience is non-veridical are just making a huge leap in logic that doesn't follow. You've got to give some reason for thinking that that experience is non-veridical.
It seems to me that the huge leap is on the other side, but of course that's been the theme all night. What the hallucinations or seizures data actually show is interesting. It is they are the only naturalistic explanation that we have of people actually having those kind of experiences. The only other alternative is that they actually really listening to God or talking to God and things of that sort. And that is a very extraordinary claim. So my point was simply to use Dr. Craig's words of a few minutes ago, that the seizures, hallucination, and things of that sort are simply a much more probable explanation for that same phenomenon. And that if he wants to negate that, then he has the burden of proof to come up with very convincing evidence that, in fact, we need to reject a naturalistic explanation of those experiences and go for a supernatural one.
Your request for a show of hands for quantum physicists drew me out of the balcony. I want to take you to task a little bit on this question that quantum mechanics provides some sort of physical basis for creation out of nothing. I think that's a distortion. You used as an example a lectern or a body being comprised mostly of nothing, but the way
empty space, I said.
Okay, well...
which is not nothing.
Okay, well, we need to be careful on how we define terms. The wave function has finite values throughout space, and the chemical interpretation is that there are widely varying charge distributions, but there's certainly not nothing.
Please.
My question is, how would he respond to this objection?
Right, they're not nothing. As I said, I did say at one point during the debate that the quantum fluctuations of the quantum field is not nothing. It's damn close to nothing, but it is not. Now the question is, why would that be relevant to the debate tonight? As I said before, I did not say that there was nothing in the table. I said that there was mostly empty space, and that seems to be a correct interpretation of modern physics. That physicists that I talk to seem to agree with that. But we can have that debate another time. The point is, why is it that somebody wants to make a leap from saying, well, we have some kind of explanation of naturalistic explanations of the origin of the universe, for example, in this case. But that's not enough. I need something more, because all that the Big Bang tells me, all that quantum mechanics tells me, is how the universe originated. It doesn't tell me, as Dr. Craig put it this morning on a radio show that we were both guests on, it doesn't tell me why there is something instead of nothing. Well, we don't have a scientific answer to why there is something instead of nothing. We might never have an explanation to that. The answer might simply be, why not? Or the answer might simply be, that's the wrong question. The sense is the question may be completely meaningless, and we don't know that that's not the case. But the most convincing argument, seems to me, is the fact that the answer that Dr. Craig gives doesn't add anything as an explanation to why the universe is out here. Just saying that there is an unmoved, uncaused cause of some sort in an Aristotelian fashion explains absolutely nothing. It sounds pretty good as philosophical mumbo-jumbo, but that's all it is. There is no additional explanatory power that is added by the fact that you say, well, God did it. And as I said before, this also amounts essentially to an argument from ignorance. Dr. Craig seems to think that he wins by default. If we don't have the answer, we don't have a scientific answer to something, then God did it. I find that completely unsatisfactory, regardless of quantum mechanics or not.
Time, please.
Well, I hope you saw that was an utter distortion of the first argument that I gave. That first argument is a deductive argument, so that the conclusion follows inescapably if you grant the premises. Now, the first premise, whatever begins to exist has a cause, seems to me obvious. Something can't come out of nothing. So the question is, did the universe begin to exist? And I gave philosophical and scientific evidence for that. And the scientific evidence, I'm not appealing to ignorance here. On the contrary, my appeal is to precisely what we do know on the basis of current science. And what we do know is that the universe began to exist in this Big Bang event, and that prior to the Big Bang there was nothing, and that therefore you cannot explain it by any sort of physical process, especially a quantum mechanical process, because quantum mechanics doesn't appeal to nothingness in the vacuum. So you are forced beyond the universe to a transcendent cause, which is timeless, changeless, immaterial, and personal. It's a sound deductive argument, I think.
Question?
One of the attributes of the Christian God is that God is perfect, and one of the objections raised to that is that if God is perfect, why did He design a universe with so many imperfections and whatnot? And the response often is that how do we know that what we think is perfect is what He would think is perfect? So my question is, that would lead me to think that the proposition that God is perfect is non-falsifiable. Is that proposition falsifiable? And if so, what would be what would be an observation that would falsify it?
All right, you said a number of things. Let me first deal with the argument, because I thought Dr. Pigliucci would bring this up tonight. The argument seems to go like this. Premise 1. If a divine designer exists, plants and animals would have optimal design. Premise 2. Plants and animals do not have optimal design. 3. Therefore, a divine designer does not exist. Now, the weakest premise in this argument, I think, is clearly the first, and Dr. Pigliucci has never given any argument as to why, if a divine designer exists, plants and animals have to have optimal design. It seems to me that a designer is free to make whatever kind of creatures he wants. An automotive engineer can design a Ford Fiesta or a Lexus. He's free to do what he wants. God could even choose to use evolution to create living creatures, in which case you would expect to see these sorts of things. What I found in our last debate was that Dr. Pigliucci's belief in this first premise is actually based on a faulty theological inference. He thought that because Christianity says that God is perfect, that therefore the world is perfect. But neither the Bible nor Christian theology has ever made this sort of implication. And in fact, I think the idea of a perfect animal or a perfect plant is probably an incoherent idea. The second thing I'd want to say is I think the second premise is also false. Optimality in design always involves a compromise of competing factors or variables. And in Dr. Pigliucci's examples that he uses, like the human eye or human metabolism or other things, overall optimality is achieved even if optimality in one respect is constrained by other respects and needs that the organism has. For example, I can show you some wonderful articles on how the optimal design of the vertebrate eye necessitates having the blood vessels and the nerves in front of the retina in order to supply massive quantities of oxygen for high acuity in the mammalian eyes. So it's not a design flaw at all. So I think this argument is just invalid, or unsound. It's got two false premises.
It seems to me that it is true that a designer is free to design whatever he wants. For example, an engineer is free to design bridges that keep collapsing, and then we'll fire him.